Well, we've heard a lot of different voices from here at the European Commission headquarters today, and the tone of the voices has largely been determined by whether the commissioners involved are staying into the next term. It should be pointed out that Ursula von der Leyen, the president-elect who was just appointed, she actually doesn't take office until November 1st. So if Johnson is really determined to settle this by October 31st, she will actually have nothing to do with it. Now, we heard from some very scathing remarks from the European Health Commissioner, Vytenis Andriukaitis. He wrote in a blog entry that Boris Johnson was selling cheap promises, simplified visions to the British people, and he actually compared the false facts that Boris Johnson has given out to the propaganda that he heard when he was growing up in the USSR. He's from Lithuania, but he is not coming back. He will be gone, and so he can kind of afford to be very blunt. But we also heard from the Vice President of the European Commission today, Frans Timmermans. He happened to be giving the midday press briefing when Boris Johnson's appointment was announced. He had a slightly more diplomatic take. He is staying on. He will continue to be the Vice President of the Commission in the next term. But he said that there is absolutely no way that the EU is going to reopen the withdrawal deal as Boris Johnson has promised they would do throughout his campaign unless the UK changes its red lines, most probably by agreeing to be in a customs union. It doesn't seem likely that Boris Johnson will do that. Now, perhaps the most important voice from the Commission is Michel Barnier. He is the EU's chief negotiator. He simply said today in a tweet, basically just acknowledged that Boris Johnson is the new prime minister. But the general consensus here in Brussels is that a renegotiation of that withdrawal deal without the UK changing its red lines is an impossibility.
All right, then. So a no-deal exit from the EU more likely than ever, given that Johnson is set to be the Prime Minister. How prepared are the Europeans for that scenario?
They're getting more and more prepared as time goes on, especially since the thinking now in Brussels is that no deal is perhaps the most likely scenario. Now, it would appear we're not being told that Johnson has any immediate plans to come here to Brussels or to any other European capitals. In fact, it seems likely that his first visit will be to Donald Trump in the U.S., and he may not come here till September. It looks like he is pursuing a brinksmanship strategy in which he will go right to the next European Council summit taking place on October 17th. And there he will hold out that threat of withdrawing without a deal and having the UK default on its financial obligations right until the last minute. And he thinks that at that October 17th summit, the EU will blink and it will say, okay, we will change the withdrawal deal to your liking. I can tell you people here think that's very unlikely. So what happens if they don't do that? Well, then there's 9 days to prepare. Given that most people here in Brussels think that this is a very likely scenario, the EU is likely to be more prepared for that eventuality because Johnson may even be blocked by his own British Parliament in going through with a no deal. So it really looks like the possibilities for October 31st are a no-deal Brexit, the British Parliament rejecting Johnson's attempt to have a no-deal Brexit, in which case that would probably kick off a general election or maybe a second referendum, or some kind of renegotiation of the withdrawal agreement if Boris Johnson can find some way to fudge those red lines. The thinking here in Brussels is also that, well, if anyone could do it, it's him. Because he's a Brexiteer, perhaps leavers in the UK will trust him more than they trusted Theresa May to bend those red lines a little bit. So we'll see. But certainly, it's all systems go here in continental Europe preparing for a no-deal Brexit on October 31st.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. Dave Keating there reporting from Brussels.